Hiring Happenings is the new podcast from Recruiting Gym, bringing you hiring news every month with a pestle twist.
Sponsored by Monster.
Hello, and welcome to the 7th edition of Hiring Happenings with a Pestle Twist. This is the monthly podcast that really delves into what's going on, and we've done the UK for political, economical, sociological, technological, legislative and environmental. So we're starting again. This time we're going global. I'm Angela Cripps, the MD of the Recruiting Gym. I've got two amazing guests with me today. We've got Fionnuala O'Connor, and the reason why I picked Fionnuala is because she had nearly 5 years at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, so let alone working with amazing recruitment companies like the Hay Group, and she's now head of transformation at OpDem. She's got a big background in politics. So political advisor to the OSCE mission head in Sarajevo, section leader for the HM Diplomatic Services in London, as well as head of economics and aid section at the British Embassy in Sarajevo. So no wonder when I saw her profile, I was like, yes, this is a lady that I want. I'll get her introduce herself in a little bit more detail in a moment. We've also got James Chaplin, CEO of VacancySoft for the last 18 years plus, who for over half his life has lived abroad. So that global inference of the information that he can bring to this, I'm really looking forward to this discussion. There is so much going on in the world. So let's get to find out a little bit more about our guests. So Fionnuala, I'm going to come to you first. Political, it's obviously been part of your job, but what about your passion? Why did you say yes to this podcast?
I think I said yes because my passion is people and how we all work together. And what I found over my working life, from right at my first job, right up till yesterday, is that there's no division between the public and the private, between the organisation and the political. And I think more and more as we're living in a disrupted world, even looking at organisational change within the organisation, you have to look at the political context and the other pestle factors as well. So I'm really passionate to talk about that kind of intersection, and particularly with such a great fellow guest.
Which brings me to you, James. Wonderfully. Thank you for that.
And look, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. And look, I mean, just to give you a bit of context. So, after I studied economics at uni, where a big part of economics is labour markets, if you look at how labour markets get impacted, I would say by far the biggest single influencer is political change. You look at, we'll be talking more about it later, whether you're looking at the new Labour government and what they're proposing to do in certain elements or everything else. So given that we're a data provider on labour markets and on jobs, we get featured in Bloomberg and Reuters, FT, etc. Very happy just to come on and just talk about what we're seeing globally in terms of macro political trends and what we then think that then means at a local level for the UK.
Yeah, and actually, thank you for sharing, because since I've met you, I've never found another blog post that I want to read all the time, which is the executive comment that you do, actually diving into all of these. So we'll get the links for these and your companies into the details here so people can go and find and explore those for themselves. So goodness, global politics, anything happening maybe? We're recording this the week after the potential assassination of Donald J. Trump. So we're going to have to go US first of all. The fact that they've got an election happening this year, over 70, I believe 72 countries are having general elections this year in the global markets, which will have a huge impact on the way that we all work. And therefore, next year could be totally different. So we want to delve into this. He's got a boost in the polls. There is the potential. So, James, what's your view now that this has happened with regards to the election in the US?
In simple terms, there's a very famous saying, which history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. The US over a century has oscillated between isolationism and what you call interventionism. And with Vance coming in as the VP, that also means that he's making a stance about what kind of policy framework he's looking to set out. Whereas in his first term, he chose to try and balance the two of them. This time he's saying, no, I'm doubling down all the way. It's the America First agenda. And my number two is going to be my right-hand man who's going to double down on everything. And Vance is, I mean, look, he's a rock and roll guy in the sense he's relatively young. He's in his late 30s, early 40s.
This is JD Vance, right?
Yeah,
Which
Vance, right?
he wrote his life story, Hillbilly Elegy. So you've got Glenn Close playing the main character in that as well. I mean, he is rock and roll, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's a highly successful tech guy. I mean, he's being backed heavily. And the reason he made the VP is, thanks to a certain person at X, and that's what I'm going to say. Elon Musk, I think, has committed. Was it $450 million every single month on the basis of JD Vance being picked as VP? So that's like, and there might be 45. Sorry, I might miss a minute zero, but it was extensive, the backing. So I mean, and sorry, bring back to this point. Isolationism. What is isolation? The best quote I've read about him is he said, given the contributions of European nations towards NATO, this now constitutes a tax on Americans. And so when we actually think through what that means, and to be fair, actually, I'm quite sympathetic. I lived in the States when I was younger, and I lived in Chicago, which is very different to New York. It's very different to the West Coast. There's like, yeah, okay, so what? It's like, yeah, whatever. And there is this kind of sense amongst Americans I speak to, once you go outside of the international outward-looking coasts, towards like, why don't they just pay their way? And that is being echoed, and that is then being represented by the political class. So, sorry, and just to summarize, and I'm blabbing, if Vance comes in, what you would expect to see happen is incredible pressure on NATO to create a ring-fenced budget which operates outside the US. You might well see a fragmentation of NATO. That's one of the best policy briefings I've read so far. It's talking about creating a divisional structure within NATO where at a defense level, NATO has to be funded by European countries in order to maintain its European operations.
And we have seen a big change over the last 4 years, haven't we, where you're right, people weren't paying their way, but we've got a vast majority now paying the 2% of their GDP into the budget. Fionnuala, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's been a wake-up call for Europe in lots and lots of ways. I think the US for some time has been moving away from being the world's policeman. As James says, and I've known the US since the very early 90s, right up until a couple of weeks ago, I was there. They are moving in a very different direction from a lot of Europeans. And I don't think European policymakers, and I think a lot of European corporations haven't really woken up to that yet. I work a lot with international companies, a lot of them based in Europe, a lot of them based in Asia, some based in the US. And more, I'm just noticing a real lack of understanding about what are you guys thinking on both sides. And I think on the defence point, NATO splitting up, real possibility. Right now, an awful lot of European countries are facing populist movements, as the US is. And the European response to that is we have to spend more money on our own people. A little bit like the US response. What's this mean for defence? I don't think Europeans are used to thinking about high defence budgets and of the level that we need to defend Ukraine, of the level that we will need to replace the American contribution to NATO. So it's tough times for politicians. And I think a lot of that disruption, a lot of that kind of just, it's not just uncertainty, it's real kind of a feeling this isn't fair. This isn't right. I'm getting a bad deal. I'm seeing a lot of that inside corporations in the workplaces too.
We will come back to Ukraine because obviously that's a big topic and that has affected us all. And certainly the crisis that we've got with regards to the cost of living. And that's not just UK, that's everywhere. And a lot of it stemmed from that. So we see how these big decisions globally end up actually with the individual, and people don't always see that. I think the last few years we've definitely moved people's opinions, people's knowledge to go, well, how does that affect me? And they're like, okay, now I can see now how it affects me. Whereas before they were always, well, sort of not in my back garden, I'm not interested, that doesn't affect me. But we know that it does. What I do want to still, while we're still on America though, Fionnuala, if we can think about that sort of political and operational risk in reference to America. So from a business point of view there, what would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple of issues. One's long term, one's very, very immediate. Dealing with the immediate issue first, as we all do. I think most people in business are convinced there's going to be a Trump administration even before the terrible events of the weekend. And they're thinking, how can we prepare for this? What's the policy priorities? And I think crucially, who are the people who are going to be making decisions? Trump is very much a people leader, not a systems leader. So I think a lot of my clients thinking, who is going to be in charge of, really vital bits of public policy that affect our interests, and not just how can we lobby them, but actually how can we understand them? How can we see what's coming? So when we're making big investment decisions, we've got some sense of what our risk profile is, because it's going to be different. So I think that's the short-term issue that lots of people. I think longer term, there really is a question of the two Americas. James, you said I've worked in Chicago a lot too. I've got relatives right in the middle of America in Sioux City, Iowa. And I've lived in New York, done a lot of business in the Valley. So, and I don't see this as the same country, as the same nation, as the same people. So I think that longer term is, that longer term, like what are we talking about when we talk about America? Increasingly, I find my clients are talking very regionally, not even just at state level, but really quite micro.
And that's where it started, isn't it? So it does seem like it's going backwards and fragmenting. I'm sorry, I was giggling because I'm like, Sioux City or Sioux Falls?
I know.
One thing which most people aren't aware of, but which is very interesting. One of the things that Trump wanted to do just before he lost the last election, which he didn't have time to put through, is he wanted to put through an executive order, which would mean that any person who operates within public as a public official was actually a political appointee. Now that's really quite interesting. But if we're working through that from a political economy point of view, one of the areas he got the most frustrated with was actually the Federal Reserve. And the reason why he got frustrated with the Federal Reserve is because he felt that during his term that there was too much caution on interest rates, that interest rates needed to be brought down faster, and that was holding up the growth in the economy, and that as a result, it basically one of the factors that lost him the election. He wasn't getting the credit for growth that was happening. So assuming he wins, one of the things that we're expecting to see, I would say, is him to try. I don't know if it will go through, but nowadays with SCOTUS, who knows? I mean, it's like they're agreeing everything he wants.
Everything's up for grabs. So can I just clarify? Is this the policy that he said around switching out? Is it the 50,000 like civil servants that we have, and making the more political appointees, and they all need to be sort of MAGA people? And you're like, okay, well, how are you going to find that many good people?
No, it's just basically being told, you want to, you're fundamentally what it means is that you are a political appointee, which means that your job protection is eliminated. You do not have an independent, if you like, civil service. You have people who just get told by Trump, this is what you're doing. Now, if that goes all the way up to the Federal Reserve, which was really where the power is on the economy, in terms of away from Trump. If you suddenly have Trump being able to dictate interest rates, well, the first thing that would happen, and we're talking through logical chain of consequence, is if you look at what Trump did in the first term, what he was seeking to do at every point was to put in place policy to boost the stock market. So you saw massive tax breaks coming in. You saw the ability for companies to actually boost their profitability. And you would see some kind of combination of that, where combined with interest rates being brought down. And so what you would expect to see is the dollar weaken quite significantly. That's already being priced into the long-term forecast for Trump presidency. So if the US dollar is being weakened, that's going to apply, I'm going to go into some macro, but some balance of payments pressure. And the US historically has traded in what it's called its shadow BOP. And what that means is so many countries in the world use dollar to stabilize themselves that the fact that the US runs a conventional, nonsensical BOP, it doesn't matter. But if you start to see the US running its BOP in a way to make it America first, as opposed to a reserve currency, there is a concern that it will destabilize the global financial system. And that's my head.
I mean, there's so much to unpack in there. My bringing it back to recruitment, my first worry is it took him over a year to fill the 650 positions that he needed for his own administration. So if he's then going to replace the 50, hey, recruiters, this could be a major opportunity for you if this is going to happen, because he didn't even realize he had to provide those people. He got into office and then found out, and it was just a disaster for the first year anyway. At least he's prepared this time. He knows what he's doing in relation to that. You've also got the scenario of, it amazes me the amount of countries that will take US dollar over their own coinage. So where you travel around the world, so whether that, like you say, if that's going to change, that will give opportunities to a lot of people if the dollar is weakened. Okay, I could talk politics all day. I could talk Trump all day. It's been a fascinating 8 years following that journey. And where that's come to. Let's head to Ukraine. James, you've got quite a stake here, haven't you? Tell us your background and the information, and then let's talk about the economy and how that's going to benefit most, hopefully, in this long-term transition and what's going to be happening.
Sure. So look, my ex-wife's Ukrainian. I was married in Ukraine. I've got a team of 20 people still. I've had a team in Lviv in Ukraine, which is on the western border, since 2006, which is when I set up the company. If you're looking at the Cold War, when the UK, before we saw the peace dividend, defense budget was about 4.5% of GDP, and it's currently at 2%. Now, Starmer's made some noise around, yes, we want to increase it, but he's not given a timetable, he's not given a commitment. So the first concern is, are we going to have a government which is going to plan for the reality of the future? Or are we going to have a government which has the future forced upon it they want to accept? Now, if we're talking about what's been happening in terms of job flow, Angela, I'll tell you the best performing company in terms of recruitment over the last 3 years has been BA Systems. Ooh, there's one. Yeah. Because now that's both in terms of share, one of the top performers in terms of share price, one of the top performers in terms of recruitment. And the other thing, which is very, very interesting, this is the opportunity, I would say, if we start, we're going to be a bit doom and gloom sometimes, but one of the opportunities with that is that the UK is one of the global leaders in the nascent space sector. And part of the reason is because we're a global leader both in telecoms and also in aerospace and defense. And so what we're starting to see is a new era where in the next phase, the Russians, I don't know if they can do it, but they're very, very pissed off about, Elon Musk and these satellites going around. So they're starting to develop a whole prototype technology, which they're calling satellite killers. And the idea is to take out low orbiting satellites so that they can't operate. Now, like anything, sword and shield, the next step is to actually get defensive systems in place. So what we're going to start to see is an investment into low orbiting defensive satellite technology. We might well see some variant of the Hellfire technologies, which are coming out through the Navy, which is designed to take out drones. And you're going to start seeing lasers in space. Now, this is all coming, it sounds all very sci-fi Star Wars, but it's all coming much, much faster than we thought. Now, with that, the UK is one of the best positioned countries in the world in that space, in terms of where we are, the companies we have, the expertise we have, in terms of the funding and the sector that's going on. You look at the VCPE money, the space sector is top 10 in terms of being funded from venture capital and private equity into the UK. So like anything, I think that the UK is a global leader in defence, even if our army isn't as big as it could be, and it is a global leader in technology and telecommunications. So the longer the war with Ukraine goes on, the more we're going to amp up our defence spending. It's inevitable.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I'm seeing you nodding a lot there, Fionnuala.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I find it very interesting because a lot of the talk about technology is around generative AI, the chat GPTs of this world. that's not the technology that's being used. That's not the technology that is making money and actually making the difference to the world. And yeah, I would absolutely echo everything James says. And I think it is, what's going to happen in Ukraine, though, especially with the Trump presidency, I think all bets are off. And what worries me is that we're not really prepared for more than the scenario we all want to happen. I think I want to pick up on the Starmer government point, because I think a concern that I hear a lot is, well, yeah, loads of good things. These are adults in the room. These are sensible managers. These are people with experience of actually running things and doing things. Two concerns that I hear, which do relate to defence in Ukraine very specifically, but also I think are more general points. The concerns are budget. If we are going to increase even to the 4.5 level historically, let alone a more realistic level, that's a ton of money. Where are Labour going to get it from? Because with the Rachel Reeves commitments to not using some of the big sources of getting government revenue, growth doesn't come quickly. And I think to that point, the second concern I'm hearing is, are they realistic about what growth requires? And also what changing some of the institutions, some of the interconnected public sector systems. I've worked over the last 4 years intermittently in the public sector, and it's difficult. These are I see all sorts of problems in the systems. And I don't see quick solutions. And also I don't see cheap solutions. So I think in that context, looking at Ukraine, it makes me very concerned. And I think more generally, for this very changing world, what's Britain's place in it? How can we establish ourselves in a world where there isn't just one power, as there has been for the last 20-ish years. There aren't two, as there were for the 50 years before then. There are three: Russia, the US, and China, which we haven't mentioned, and I think is the elephant in lots of rooms.
Yes, and well, we say China, but actually in India, let's throw that into it as well. I was working in Ahmedabad in December and went past the space centre there that's set up. Now, Ahmedabad was not a big place 30 years ago. It's now 8 million people living there. So if you haven't heard of it, I'm not surprised. But they've now got the Indian Space Centre there, and they launched their rocket around that time as well. There was lots of excitement around this. Now, this isn't my world, it's not things, but that quite shocked me that they've sort of come up in the space race in this sense. So although you're saying, James, that, yeah, we've got a lot of the knowledge and the skills here, are we going to lose them to places that are actually growing and developing from themselves? Again, from a movement point of view, we saw this 20 years ago, where that brain drain, where we suddenly saw an exodus of people. They weren't happy with what was happening in the UK at the time, and went all around the world and developed every other country's systems and support and processes. Because we usually are very good at that. So who knows where that one's going to lead. Do we have any comments on China that we want to add in while we're here with regards to it? Because I'm getting conflicting reports all the time. Last year it was all doom and gloom, but it seems like it's not so much now. Do you have any views on that?
I'm quite cynical. At the moment, the Chinese are biding their time. They're looking to see how the Ukraine situation plays out. The more the West back down on Ukraine, the more bullish they're going to be on Taiwan. So the shipping corridor between Taiwan and the mainland I think it's one of the most busy shipping lanes in the world. Look at the fab factories there; they are absolutely critical to global supply of consumer electronics. Now, the thing is, and the latest analysis coming out of this is that the Chinese aren't going to invade, but what they may well do is blockade. They don't need to actually go in. That's why when you look at all the drills that are being run, which they're doing, there was one about a month ago, I think, and what they did is they just basically you look at the maps that come out, and they literally put in like 30 or 40 boats all around, and they designed it so that nothing could come in, nothing come out. And when you've got an island which is that densely populated, well, there's no agriculture there. It's completely reliant on imports in order to sustain itself. So my sense is that the Chinese aren't going to necessarily, it's like, they're going to play encirclement. They're going to play Go. They're going to wait and wait and wait, and they're going to apply pressure through making it increasingly hard. And they're going to fund political opposition to the government, which are pro-independence, and they're going to bide their time. And, because and then if they see a moment of weakness where the West is not unified and is not showing strength, they'll go.
I've got a visual here of a schoolyard with loads of kids in the middle, with two going fight, 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 and everyone around it. And then someone just over on the edge, just watching everything and seeing what's going to happen, and then going to make their decision based on there. Now, hopefully we're not dealing with a load of school children and they're fighting that way, but sometimes it does feel like it. I'm sorry, it does. Right, let's get back to our recruitment elements here. We're talking all over the world, and obviously China the other side of the world. So one of the things I did want to ask you, Fionnuala, is around managing an international team, because everyone's so politically disrupted. Like you say, laws, administrations, everything's in flux. So how can people manage their international teams at the moment?
I think there are two kinds of international teams. There's a team that sits in London or Bangkok or Dubai or wherever, that's made up of different nationalities and cultures. And then there's, if you like, a totally international team that crosses time zones, geographies, cultures, legal systems. Now, the first one, nothing's changed much. I think a lot of people have much more a sense of their national identity. I think identity is something that we're all more conscious of these days. So possibly more tensions, more stress in the air. And I think what good leaders do is they call that out. And when they're bringing people into a team, they make sure they understand what kind of team this is, what it's like working in a very diverse environment, because diverse teams often get better results. Where they don't is because the dynamics haven't been managed properly. So not a lot's changed in that sort of international team. A lot's changed when you're talking about cross-border teams or teams where you're wanting to transfer people between countries, as a lot of large companies have just been used to doing without worrying too much. That's changing a lot. With China, it's very, very difficult now to get people in and out of China. I think a lot of international companies are very wary about new investments, not just because of concerns about intellectual property theft, about potential difficulties with collaboration, but just inherently they're thinking, is China a global partner or is China looking inwards? And I think the other concern some companies who are selling into China have is consumer confidence. It's really dropped there recently. What exactly is going on? It's really hard to tell. I mean, James, you'll know far better than I do. The trouble with getting accurate macro and even what's the word for the middle between micro and macro?
Meso level.
Very few sources, very few reliable sources, very difficult to actually get information to and fro. So, and I think with the US, people are worried, what is a Trump administration going to mean for foreign workers coming in and out? How easy is it going to be to get visas? The UK, it's a problem now for us, getting highly skilled workers in. So I think those genuinely international teams, that lots of big companies like Amazon prides itself on working that way. Lots of other companies do similarly. That's going to be difficult. So I think from a recruitment point of view, probably not as much work for those kind of roles. But I think more in country work in a lot of places, as we were saying with the US. And I think there are lots of examples elsewhere.
I can see a boom happening next year with regards to recruitment, because I think so many companies are going to be, just like you say, a bit like China, hedging their bets, just watching what's going to be happening before they decide what their strategy is even going to be, because it could be so different depending on who gets in. I mean, we thought we were going to have a far-right French government 2 weeks ago, or at the beginning of July, and obviously that all changed as well. So politics is so quick to move. I don't remember it ever being in this scenario where we've got such big changes and the impacts that it can have. They say, may you live in exciting times, but hey, maybe just a little bit next year. Can we just have a bit of a sense of
That's not going to happen.
calm it all down a little bit? Yeah, that's true.
No. I think it goes back. Sorry, I think it goes back much more to you've got to know the people who are going to be in the rooms, and that, you know, a lot of politics is going personal now. It feels like, rather than systemically predictable. So hopefully there will be a boom.
Fionnuala, and just I'll ask you a question. Historically, you know, let's go back a generation. There was a much bigger emphasis on local FCO offices to be conduits for business to actually operate in those markets and help navigate the local issues that they needed to think through, especially when we're thinking about how can I say local customs and introductions and all of those kind of things. I mean, do you think that's something which we're going to see start to return?
I would hope so. I think there are two issues. One is, why should important people in a particular country talk to Britain? It used to be we were a major power in the EU and we were America's best friend. I think both of those have been called into question right now. So access, I think, is going to be more of an issue. Having said it, I think that there are lots of changes happening that are starting to happen, are going to happen in the UK's public-facing ministries, and that's not just the Foreign Office. You know, obviously, lots of ministries themselves have foreign activities, representatives within embassies. I'd hope we would, because I think, you know, Britain pulling together, and actually I saw in real time, not so much in Bosnia, I was there during the war, but in other embassies, the really great work of just being able to make introductions, but also, as you say, give that kind of cultural background. What are the real power relationships that don't go with the job titles? What are the do's and don'ts? You know, you mentioned France, the French election. I lived in France for years. A really basic thing in France is you always say good morning or good afternoon or whatever to people when you walk in, not just a meeting, an office where people are sitting around, a shop. You know, that's a very trivial thing, and it matters. And I think all cultures have those little tells, and diplomats, as well as the very big power relationships and introductions, they can also help with those nuances that make all the difference.
Yeah, because that's a first impression that's been made, and if you don't get it right, unfortunately, that can impact the whole relationship, can't it? So, like you say, it's a little thing, but it will mean something, and being aware of that. Going back to those managing those teams, and like you say, when you're bringing people in, something I've always loved and I use in my management training is Bruce Tuckman's forming, storming, norming, performing. I don't know if that means anything to you, but those 4 stages of a team, of bringing someone new in and forming a new team, and the storming elements that tend to go on as people are sort of vying for where's my position, who's this person, what they're going to do, and are they going to take my job, and all those elements, to the point where they understand each other and they get it and they understand their strengths and their development areas, as we call them in training, not weaknesses, and what they bring to the team. So the norming around it, okay, this is us, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and it's only then really that you get to that performing stage. So if you haven't heard of that, the link will be in there as well. But really helpful when you're bringing in a new team member to go through that with all the team and to appreciate, well, this is what's likely to happen, and how quickly we get through it is down to us. So it could really drag out and be awful, or we could all appreciate it, understand it, and move through it quite quickly. So hopefully that will help some people as well if you're bringing in new members of teams. Last topics then. We've gone it very international, global politics, so much happening in the world. We couldn't tackle them all, but we do want to relate it back to how it actually relates to us. So new government here. What do we think that's going to mean for EU relations? Because when we left that trade bloc, we saw the impact, and they're saying around sort of Brexit has cost us 20% of revenue over the last 5 years. So what do we think it's going to mean for us now in the economy as a result of us having a new government?
I don't think at this time there's the political appetite for a rerun of the referendum. But what I do think is, look, Starmer, the Labour government, have come out and said we're going to try and do deals to actually improve things, whether that's reducing friction on trade, whether that's improving defence and military coordination. And I think it's just going to be a bit by bit. There's not going to be anything radical. There's not going to be anything revolutionary. But it is going. What we might start to see is little subtle and perceptible changes, where the UK has a big challenge is you talk about is effectively our skills gap, and that's really at the heart of it. Now, part of we look at Brexit and post-Brexit, what's happened, we've still got just as much immigration happening, and it's because, for example, if you look at engineers, I think for every 2 engineers that's going to retire in 5 years, there's 1 person graduating from engineering school. I mean, that's just one example, right? And you talk about all the investment that the Labour Party want to do, whether it's into energy, whether it's into transportation, whether it's into all the stuff that's going to be going on defence, it all requires engineers, and that's just one skill category. What I think is that we're going to, under Labour, see a slightly different approach to visas, skilled visas, fast-track visas, where there's going to be less concern about, oh my God, all these foreigners, etc., and it's going to be more nuanced and more subtle. And there may well be, as part of it, some special deal, like going back to Erasmus, the way that we're involved there, and going back in terms of getting involved into the international parts of the EU and integrating into the STEM aspects of the UK, where the UK remains a leader in STEM, and getting the STEM parts of the UK back, being integrated, Horizon and all the rest of it being integrated with the EU again. I mean, that's what I think.
Yeah, we're both nodding here, Fionnuala.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. The only thing I would add is there's something else that we need to work on, and that's management. UK management, by all the ways in which people can measure it, has tanked over the last 20 years. We see that in all sorts of ways, not just the productivity statistics. We see it in things like the fact that sick leave is rising up and increasingly is seen as a way of protesting at working conditions that aren't helping you do your job. And I think this is reflected in the broad political environment here. At this last election, the general election we've just had, I think it was only 52% of the electorate voted. That is the lowest turnout when you look at the proportions.
Right. It was really. You're going back generations. It was one of the lowest turnouts ever.
Gosh.
Yeah, and I think what does that say about our society? I think looking at management, and I say management rather than leadership, because I think there's lots to talk about leadership, and often, unfortunately, that's interpreted as you set the standard, you make a nice speech, and you kind of keep at a distance a little bit. Whereas management is in the weeds. It's, Angela, what you were talking about with onboarding teams, what you're talking about when you're recruiting, you're actually thinking not just, is the best person to hire for the job, is this the best person to hire for the team, for the company, for what the changes might be that we don't know yet. So I think, looking at actually getting a management cadre, and that's not just the technical training, that's also, I think, the very, very much on the job training. And I see smart organizations already over the last few years moving to invest heavily in real management training and to value managers, because we need people more and more in an unpredictable world who can tie things together, keep the ship going in whatever tacking direction it needs to go.
And be able to tack and change.
I just want to back that up. There's this great study, and it shows when British companies are bought by American companies, performance doubles.
Yeah, because they get the training and the development.
American managers come in and start establishing best practice, in class, and they start. And look, this may sound obvious to us, but it starts with productivity. Starts with engagement. If people aren't engaged, then they don't. They do the minimum, and they treat it as a tick box exercise. And best practice starts with alignment. And making people understand the common vision and how they fit within it and why their role is important. And then it also goes back to creating intelligent incentives. and making sure that people understand how they can create synergy between business performance and their own personal financial situation. And just doing those, which in America, I mean, having lived in the States, they're much better at it than Brits.
And we can learn. There's a great second mover advantage we can take, I think.
I didn't pay them, honestly, but yes, if you need leadership and management training in the recruitment industry, hello, 25 years of it. So pick up from those, but it is so important. And we see so often recruiters getting promoted because they're the best recruiter, they become the manager. It's a totally different job. They've got no idea how to manage a team. And I love things like Belbin, when you talked about what do we need in the team, it's not necessarily, we don't need the same again. We need to actually look at, what's missing out of our team that's going to make a high performing team, and things like that can make a huge difference. And if people take a step back before
I've got a question for you. I mean, and maybe this is me being a bit cynical, but to what extent do you think recruitment firms still rely on taking all the guys out and getting them drunk as their primary motivational team building method? Is that still happening?
I'm glad to say. I mean, it still happens a lot, but it's less and less, and it's not seen as the major thing. What's really happened over the last 4 years since lockdown is that appreciation of neurodiversity and how people can thrive in different situations. And actually, the social element that was always very much part of recruitment isn't for everyone. So there's been a relaxation on that, thank goodness. And yes, it happens for those that love it, and it doesn't happen for those that don't. They do something else or something different. So again, that adaptation of management. I'm an SL2 trainer as well, situational leadership, because it is all about adapting to the individuals and the tasks that they're tackling. So if we can get that mindset so that people are aiming to get the best out of everyone, then of course that's going to make a huge difference, and we're going to have an opportunity to thrive as this market turns and moves again, as it always does, because next month it'll be economics again. So we'll see where we are ended up from there. Okay, last question then, Fionnuala. What can we learn from populism to engage candidates, and what are some counter lessons maybe?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, because in an environment where, as we've just said, a lot of people are not engaged in politics, at work, increasingly in even their home lives. I mean, the rise of, particularly in the young, under 30s, particularly in young men, the rise of isolation, all kinds of troubles that very obviously stem from just not being engaged. Populism does engage. Now, what I've seen it do is, one, it respects people. And I think that's something that, a lot of complaints I hear from people about recruitment, I didn't feel that anyone gave a damn about me. And I think that respecting people and being curious about them is a lesson that I've seen the most effective. I'm not going to say good, because I think most populists, unfortunately, do not have good effects, but that's effective. I think also there's something about being kind of human and flawed. Take Donald Trump. I heard an interview recently which really opened my eyes. Somebody said, yeah, I like Donald Trump because he comes back. He's not hit somebody who has had a glittering business career or a glittering political career, but he's a guy who doesn't lie down. And I think the populists get what failure is like. And I think a lot of us in this very uncertain world are intimately connected with failure and fear. So I think that, again, is a lesson that we can maybe learn from the other side. And I think the other thing they do is they're quite funny. Never forget we're human beings. People are people. If you make a mistake at work, actually being open and kind of funny about it, that helps. So I think those are just sort of lessons that I suppose, when I look at a lot of the non-populist world, I feel we've forgotten those a bit. Maybe we can learn something from the bad guys.
Well, I mean, to me, that's what recruitment is all about. Yes, we can make mistakes, but we put our hands up to them. But it is all about the relationships and the interactions that we have. And that's where AI won't be able to take over. So yes, it can take all the menial jobs and all the process jobs and the compliance stuff. We'll get into that again in technology. I'm sure it will have changed again by the end of the year. But from our point of view, and that's what politics is as well. Like we started with that, didn't we? It's about these relationships that they have, and that's when things get done. So let's hope then all of these elections, we're getting people in that feel the same way and want to move things forwards and not backwards would be really helpful. I think that's a lovely note to finish it on. So thank you to my two guests, James Chaplin from VacancySoft and Fionnuala O'Connor from OpDem. Really interesting conversations, lots to take from that. We'll put all the links in there for you as well to go off and do more research on this. And that's our aim. Hiring happenings with a pestle twist. Let's talk about these things. Let's utilize the information. Let's have these conversations with our clients, with our customers, with our candidates to really start the conversation moving forwards so that we can look longer term as to what's coming up, what's happening, what do we need to be prepared for. And thank you again to Monster UK for 30 years of putting candidates and jobs together. We've got our little monster here as well that sponsor the hiring happenings. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again next month for economics.